The forest retreat was a secluded haven nestled deep within the woods. Tall trees stood sentinel, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, as if whispering secrets to each other. Sarah wandered along the winding path, her camera slung over her shoulder, capturing the serene beauty of nature. She had fled here with David and seeking solace from the monotony of their lives. David, her husband, was a doctor, always on call, always distracted. He moved through life like a sleepwalker, never truly present. His eyes would glaze over during conversations as if his mind was elsewhere. Sarah had tried to connect with him, but it was like trying to grasp a handful of sand. The harder she squeezed, the more it slipped away. On the other hand, was a constant presence in their lives. Tied to her suspicious neighbor, Henry's words dripped with venom whenever he was mentioned. Sarah couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden behind saccharin's smile and calculating gaze. As she walked, the trees grew taller, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The air thickened with an almost palpable tension, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in anticipation of something yet to come. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't from fear, it was excitement. She had been feeling restless lately, suffocated by the familiarity of her life. David's absence, both physically and emotionally, had left a void she couldn't fill. She longed for something more, something that would ignite the spark within her. The camera clicked away, capturing moments that felt like snapshots of her own fragmented soul. As she turned a bend in the path, a figure emerged from the trees. Tall, dark-haired, and mesmerizingly handsome, he caught her attention with an effortless ease. Sarah's breath hitched as their eyes met, the connection crackling like electricity between them. He smiled, and the world around her melted into nothingness. For what felt like an eternity, they stood there, suspended in a charged moment of mutual awareness. The air vibrated with tension, heavy with unspoken promise. Sarah's skin prickled as he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. She felt a thrill course through her veins, as if the forest itself was urging her to take that first step into the unknown. "Hi," he said finally, breaking the spell but only slightly. Sarah found her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi." He smiled again, and this time his eyes crinkled at the corners, sending shivers down her spine. "I'm James. I've seen you around." She nodded, still caught in the web of his gaze. "Sarah, yeah, we're all staying here for a bit." James's eyes never wavered from hers as he continued to walk towards her, drawing her into an unspoken dance. The forest seemed to close in around them, creating a sanctuary from the outside world. As they reached each other, Sarah felt a jolt of electricity. It was then she realized that James had no idea who she was or what her story was. And for one intoxicating moment, she didn't care about anything else but the connection building between them like a slow-burning fire. Sarah's heart still lingered in her throat as she watched James disappear into the trees, leaving her breathless and bewildered. Who was this enigmatic stranger, and why did he make her feel like she'd been kissed by sunshine? She shook off the lingering dizziness and turned back to who stood frozen behind her, a mixture of curiosity and concern etched on her face. "Who's that?" asked, nodding discreetly towards James as he receded into the forest. Sarah smiled, still feeling the thrum of their electrifying encounter. "No idea," she said, trying to sound nonchalant despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "But I think we're going to have some interesting company for a while." Raised an eyebrow, but Sarah knew better than to press for more information just yet. His gaze was already darting around the forest, as if searching for any sign of Henry, their mutual nemesis. As they continued walking, James reappeared, his dark hair mussed from the wind. He caught up with them easily, falling into step beside Sarah like he'd been born to walk alongside her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, flashing a dazzling smile that made Sarah's pulse quicken once more. Hesitated for a moment before nodding graciously. "Not at all," she said coolly, but Sarah detected a hint of wariness in her voice. The three of them walked on, their conversation flowing easily as James effortlessly wove himself into the fabric of their lives. David's banter was stilted by comparison, and Sarah found herself smiling at James's witty remarks and effortless charm. As they approached the secluded cabin where they were staying, a low growl rumbled from within, groaned in exasperation. "Henry's here," she muttered under her breath. "I knew he'd follow us." Sarah exchanged a sympathetic glance with James, who raised an eyebrow at the mention of Henry's name. "Your neighbor?" he asked, his tone light but probing. Nodded curtly, eyes flashing with annoyance. "Don't even get me started," she said, quickening her pace as they entered the cabin. David was already there, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at his phone with an expression that made Sarah's heart sink. He looked up, caught sight of James standing beside her, and nodded absently before returning to his conversation. Sarah felt a pang of disappointment, but James didn't seem to notice. Instead, he focused on her, his eyes sparkling with warmth as they stepped into the cabin together. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she'd found someone who truly saw her, someone who made her feel alive. As the evening drew in, Henry emerged from the shadows, his presence an unspoken threat that hung in the air like a challenge. James seemed oblivious to the tension, but Sarah's instincts screamed at her to be cautious. She was torn between the sense of excitement that lingered long after their initial meeting and the creeping unease that threatened to snuff out the spark she'd kindled with James. Little did she know, this was only the beginning, a dance between secrets, lies, and forbidden attraction that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and those around her. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the cabin, but Sarah's mood was far from tranquil. Henry's arrival had soured the atmosphere, his presence like a dark cloud looming over their little sanctuary. She felt trapped, unable to escape the weight of his malevolent gaze. Seemed equally on edge, her words laced with venom as she exchanged heated whispers with David. Sarah tried to tune out their argument, focusing instead on James, who stood at the periphery of the room, sipping a glass of wine and observing the scene with an air of detached curiosity. As the tension mounted, Sarah felt a subtle shift in the dynamics within the group. Animosity towards Henry seemed to be growing by the minute, her words dripping with malice as she accused him of following them. David's responses were curt and dismissive, but Sarah detected a flicker of unease beneath his surface-level calm. James, on the other hand, remained an enigma. He listened attentively, his eyes never leaving or Henry as they exchanged blows in a verbal battle. His presence seemed to be the only thing that kept the atmosphere from becoming toxic, his very being a counterbalance to the dark undercurrents running through the room. Sarah found herself stealing glances at James, her heart skipping a beat whenever their eyes met. It was as if he sensed her unease and was trying to reassure her with his calm, gentle demeanor. She couldn't help but feel drawn to him, like a moth to a flame that seemed to burn brighter with every passing moment. As the night wore on, his words became more heated, her accusations leveled at Henry growing increasingly personal. Sarah began to wonder if there was more to their animosity than met the eye. Was it merely a case of neighborly dislike or something deeper? James seemed to sense her curiosity and leaned in close, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I have to admit I'm intrigued by your little group," he said, his eyes scanning the room with an air of quiet observation. "You all seem complicated." Sarah laughed softly, feeling a spark of connection with James that she couldn't quite explain. "That's one way to put it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they spoke, Henry's presence seemed to grow more oppressive, his eyes fixed on like a hawk circling its prey. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as he began to edge closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "It's getting late," David muttered, rising from his chair and signaling the others to follow suit. "We should get some rest." Sarah nodded in agreement, grateful for the excuse to escape the claustrophobic atmosphere of the cabin. As they filed out into the night air, James fell back to walk beside her. "Thanks for being a lifeline tonight," Sarah said, smiling up at him as they strolled through the forest. James's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled back. "Any time," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of your complicated lives." Sarah shivered, feeling a thrill run down her spine as James's words hung in the air like a challenge. Little did she know that their encounter was only the beginning, a dance between secrets, lies, and forbidden attraction that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and those around her. As they reached the cabin door, Sarah hesitated, feeling an inexplicable sense of uncertainty. What lay hidden in the shadows of their little sanctuary? And what secrets would James's enigmatic presence uncover in the days to come? Sarah stepped inside the cabin, feeling a sense of relief wash over her as she shed the weight of the evening's tension. The others were already settling in for the night, their murmurs and whispers a soothing background hum. David was sprawled on the couch, had retreated to the loft, and Henry was nowhere to be seen. But Sarah knew he wouldn't stay hidden for long. His presence lingered like an uninvited guest, casting a shadow over their little sanctuary. She tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on James, who stood in the doorway, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. As she slipped past him, he fell into step beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Sarah nodded, though a part of her felt like she was stuck between worlds, the serene beauty of nature outside and the dark undercurrents within. She tried to brush off the unease, telling herself it was just her imagination running wild. Their footsteps echoed through the cabin as they walked towards their separate quarters. Sarah felt James's presence lingering long after he'd bid her good night, his words still resonating in her mind. "I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of your complicated lives." She pushed open her door, slipping into the quiet darkness within. As she changed for bed, a shiver ran down her spine as she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her eyes seemed deeper, her skin more pale than usual, and then there was the look on her face, a mix of longing and uncertainty. She sighed, trying to shake off the feeling that she was losing control. But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and the spark between her and James was already taking root. She couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in his enigmatic presence, and whether he'd reveal them to her. As she climbed into bed, Sarah felt a sense of unease settle over her. It wasn't just Henry's malevolent gaze or animosity that had her on edge. It was the feeling that they were all dancing around something, a truth hidden beneath the surface that threatened to upend their carefully constructed lives. She drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of the forest outside, the hooting owls and rustling leaves. But as she slipped into a dreamless sleep, her mind was already racing ahead, imagining scenarios with James at the center. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sun shining through the windows like a beacon of hope. Sarah felt revitalized, her senses heightened as she joined the others in the cabin's main room. Was brewing coffee, David was staring blankly into space, and he was nowhere to be seen. "Guess he decided not to join us for breakfast," said dryly, as if daring anyone to contradict her. Sarah exchanged a wry glance with James, who smiled back at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Maybe we should start a collection for his absence," she suggested, trying to keep the tone light. As they laughed and joked around the table, Sarah felt a sense of normalcy creeping in, but only on the surface. Beneath it all, the tension simmered, waiting to boil over. It was then that James stood up, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. "I'll go check if Henry's okay," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. Sarah felt a jolt of surprise, wondering why James would take on the task. But as she watched him disappear into the morning light, she sensed that this was just the beginning, a chain reaction of events that would unravel the secrets hidden within their little sanctuary. And when James returned, his expression was unreadable, his eyes veiled behind a mask of calm. "He's fine," he said, as if sharing a secret only Sarah could hear. "But I think we should be prepared for more surprises." As the others continued to chat and laugh around the table, Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. What lay hidden in James's words? And what secrets would their little sanctuary reveal in the days to come? As James returned to the cabin, his enigmatic smile hinted at secrets he refused to share. Sarah's heart quickened as she sensed that their connection was about to take a dramatic turn. She tried to focus on the morning's conversation, but her mind kept drifting back to James and the promise in his eyes. The tension between and Henry continued to simmer, their animosity growing more pronounced with each passing minute. David seemed oblivious to it all, lost in his own world as he stared blankly into space. But Sarah knew better. She'd caught glimpses of a man torn apart by secrets and lies. As they cleared the table, James excused himself once more, disappearing into the morning light. This time, however, he didn't return alone. A figure emerged from the trees. Henry's unmistakable presence seemed to darken the air around him like a shadow. His eyes flashed with anger as she confronted her neighbor, but Sarah noticed something else, a glimmer of recognition in Henry's gaze, as if he saw something in that no one else did. It was then that Sarah realized the truth. Their animosity wasn't just about dislike or distrust. It was about secrets. James reappeared, his eyes locked onto Sarah's as he moved towards her with an air of purpose. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. The cabin seemed to shrink around them as they stepped outside into the bright sunlight. His voice trailed off behind them, but Sarah didn't care. She was focused on James and the secrets he was about to reveal. "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding in anticipation. James took a deep breath before speaking. "I know about David," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know about the affair." Sarah's world came crashing down around her as she felt like she'd been punched in the gut. The truth hit her like a slap. James was more than just a charming stranger. He was a catalyst for change. She tried to speak, but her words caught in her throat as tears welled up in her eyes. James wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the world around them melted away. In that moment, nothing else mattered except for the connection between them, a spark that had ignited into a blazing inferno of passion and desire. Their lips met in a fierce kiss, the tension building to a fever pitch as they surrendered to their feelings. The forest seemed to come alive around them. Birds sang, leaves rustled, and the wind whispered secrets in their ears. As they pulled away for air, Sarah gazed up at James with tears streaming down her face. "Why did you stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled back at her. "I couldn't help but be drawn to your story," he said, his voice full of emotion. "And I knew that you deserved the truth and more." Their lips met once again in a kiss that left them both breathless. The secrets were still out there, waiting to be unraveled, but for now, Sarah didn't care. She was lost in the thrall of James's love. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the forest seemed to whisper its own secrets, secrets of love and desire that would forever change their lives. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the landscape, as if blessing their forbidden love. In this moment, Sarah knew that nothing else mattered, not David's infidelity, nor Henry's malevolent presence, nor secrets. All that mattered was James and the spark between them, a flame of passion that would burn bright for years to come. As they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand, Sarah smiled up at James with tears shining in her eyes. "I think we're just starting to unravel our complicated lives," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James smiled back, His eyes locked onto hers as he replied, "Together, we can face whatever comes next."